Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. Here's what's coming up on the program today. In his nightly address, President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, calls for Russia to be recognized as a terrorist state. Russian security services accuses Ukraine of Daria Dugina's murder. And the race is on across Ukraine to build new bunkers, not for soldiers on the front lines, but for students in schools. Let's get into it. 3 Ukrainian soldiers who say they were wounded and taken prisoner by Russia after one of the war's biggest battles and later released have accused their captors of torture and psychological pressure. Men, part of a force, have spent weeks fighting from a vast steel works in the southern port of Mariupol after Russia's February 24 invasion, told a news conference in Kyiv that their captors wanted to force them to confess crimes against civilians. Their accounts have not been independently verified, but the trio, who said they were captured by Russian forces in the Defense Ministry, said have not responded to a request for comment. Ukraine has previously accused Russia of war crimes, and Moscow has denied the allegations. Those 3 were exchanged for Russian prisoners of war. It's not immediately clear when the swap took place, but in June, Ukraine announced that Russia had handed over 144 captives. After fighting for weeks from the bunkers and tunnels of steelworks, hundreds of Azov fighters surrendered in May, though the Azov prisoners have not been formally charged. On August 2nd, Russia's Supreme Court ruled that the regiment was a terrorist organization. One of the released men, Denis Cheporko, also a member of Azov, said he had been held in a prison in the self-proclaimed Russian-backed Donetsk People's Republic in eastern Ukraine. Well, Russia's defense ministry says forces have continued to strike ammunition depots in Donetsk and in other places as the Ukrainian army claims to have blocked Russian offensive in various directions. According to the defense ministry spokesperson Igor Konashenkov, the Russian forces hit multiple Ukrainian command posts, personnel and weapons from Sunday into Monday. The multiple ammunition depots in Kherson region and Donetsk have been destroyed. Russian air defense troops have also shot down Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles in Donetsk, Kherson and Kharkiv, and intercepted the shells of multiple rocket launchers, including the shells of HIMARS MLRS. According to the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces on Monday, Russian forces had launched attacks on Kharkiv, Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and the Ukrainian army thwarted the Russian attacks in Bakhmut and in other places. People living near Europe's largest nuclear power plant in southern Ukraine say they're worried about the potentially disastrous consequences if it were hit by shells. Russia and Ukraine repeatedly accuse each other of firing at the Zaporizhzhia facility, which lies close to the town of Enorda, that pro-Moscow forces now control. Head of the city's civil military administration says local authorities have a plan to cope with an accident, noting some shells are falling close to the plant's 6 reactors. Meanwhile, President Volodymyr Zelensky has once again called for Russia to be recognized as a terrorist state. He made the appeal in his nightly address. President Zelensky thanked those promoting the move to legally define the country as a terrorist state. United Nations on Monday said so far over 5,000 civilians have been killed in this war alone. Ukraine's Independence Day is tomorrow, but there will be no celebrations, at least not in the open. Kyiv has banned public celebrations this week to commemorate independence from Soviet rule, citing a heightened threat of Russian attacks. Speaking about Wednesday's 31st independence anniversary, President Zelensky called for Ukrainians abroad to spread the word about the invaders' crimes. Sharing some positive news, however, he announced the railway connecting Ukraine and Moldova has been repaired and relaunched. Zelensky says the route was closed for almost 24 tons, and the reopening will allow for an average of 10 million tons of cargo to be transported per year.
I'm grateful to all European politicians who do not forget that an eighth sanctions package against Russia is essential. The longer the gap between the sanction packages, the greater Russia's impertinence. And I'm grateful to all our friends, all of our friends of freedom around the world, who are promoting the need to recognize the objective reality and legally define Russia as a terrorist state. This decision will come anyway, sooner or later, and the only question is how many lives Russia will be able to take before the backlash from the international community becomes really tangible to those who are responsible for this terror. The total number of cruise missiles of various types that Russia has used against us is approaching 3,500. The number of Russian artillery strikes is simply impossible to count. Just how many there are, how intense they are. And at the same time, the terrorist state does not stop playing with international structures. And once again, it has the nerve to convene the UN Security Council to discuss its own provocations, its own terror at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant.
Reactions still following the murder of the daughter to Putin ally and the man referred to as his brain, Alexander Dugin. But Russian security services say the attack on the vehicle Daria Dugina was in was launched by Ukraine's security services. Russian media TASS is reporting the murder of journalist Daria Dugina has been solved. He was prepared by the Ukrainian special services by a citizen of Ukraine. TASS reported citing Russia's Federal Security Service, the FSB, which named a woman as the perpetrator and says she had fled to Estonia after the attack. Ukraine has denied any involvement in Dugina's killing, calling the FSB claims fiction. Secretary of Ukraine's National Security Council, Oleksiy Danilov, in an interview on Ukrainian television on Monday, said, "We have nothing to do with the murder of this lady. This is the work of the Russian special services." Dugina, the editor of a Russian disinformation website, died after a bomb planted in a car she was driving went off in the outskirts of Moscow on Saturday evening. The FSB said the assailant was a Ukrainian woman who arrived in Russia on July 23rd with her young daughter. The pair attended a festival on Saturday near Moscow where Dugina was a guest of honor. After remotely detonating explosives planted in Dugina's Toyota Land Cruiser Prado, the FSB said the woman and her daughter drove through the Pskov region to Estonia, roughly a 12-hour journey. Russian President Vladimir Putin has expressed his condolences to the Dugina family, describing Daria as a talented person with a radiant personality and true Russian heart. He also said Daria showed with her actions what it means to be a patriot of Russia, describing her death as a heinous and cruel crime. Daria's father was not only known in Russia, Daria herself was also known for her active support of the ongoing Russian military offensive in Ukraine. President Putin has posthumously awarded her the Order of Courage, a state decoration that recognizes selfless acts of courage and valor. Daria's heartbroken father, Alexander Dugina, has released a response to the bombing that killed his daughter on Saturday outside of Moscow, which may have targeted him. He also blames the Ukrainian government for a murder, saying he wants a military victory rather than revenge. A statement released by his ally, conservative tycoon Konstantin Malofeyev, says, "As you know, in a terrorist act by the Nazi Ukrainian regime, my daughter Daria was savagely murdered before my eyes on August 20 while returning from the Tradition Festival near Moscow." He also wrote, "Daria was a beautiful Orthodox girl, a patriot, a military correspondent, a TV expert and philosopher. Her speeches and reporting have always been profound, grounded and restrained. She never called for violence or war. She was a rising star at the beginning of her journey. The enemies of Russia killed her dishonorably on the sly. His statement. He says such acts of terrorism want to break the will of Russians by targeting the best and most vulnerable among them, adding that the terrorists will not succeed. Wishing for simple revenge or retribution would be too petty and un-Russian. His words. Ukraine's Azov regiment has also denied Russia's claims that it killed Daria Dugina, a daughter of the Russian ultra-nationalist, in a car bomb over the weekend. A father, a prominent ideologue, was killed. Dugina, whose father, Alexander Dugin, was a prominent ideologue, was killed on Saturday evening when that bomb blew up the Toyota Land Cruiser she was driving. Although the FSB says the attack was carried out by a Ukrainian woman born in 1979, it's named her, put up a picture as well, and personal information on Russian news websites. The websites link her to Ukraine's security services and accuse her of being a member of the Azov battalion, a unit of Ukraine's army that Russia has designated a terrorist group. In response, the group says that the woman named by the FSB had never been a member of the unit. It accuses Russia of concocting a lie.
No, I don't know her personally, this woman. Secondly, the documents they showed, meaning the enemy's media outlets, don't belong to a person serving in the Azov battalion. I will explain why. Our uniform has multi-cam pattern. All our soldiers were photographed wearing this uniform for their documents. You can review the news right now. This woman is wearing the National Guard's uniform. Her military ID states that she is a fighter of the National Guard's Military Division 3057. This division includes the Azov Special Battalion, but not everyone who serves is the 3057 Military Division serves in the Azov Battalion, and this woman does not serve in Azov Battalion. Cut.
I want to bring in now Captain Bish Johnson, who's a retired U.S. Army captain, also national defense and military strategist. He joins us now via Zoom. He's in Abuja. Thank you, Captain Johnson, for joining us on the program this morning.
Thank you and good morning.
Good morning. I want you to share your thoughts on this. First of all, who do you think is or was behind the killing of Daria Dugina? We're hearing from both sides the accusations of flying from the Russian FSB. The Ukrainian security services also denying. Now the Azov military battalion also denying it had any hand in Daria's murder. Who do you think did it?
I think it's too early, based on my experience, to say definitively who was responsible for carrying out this killing. This kind of things usually require some time, to investigate and actually find out, one, by identifying the individual that is involved, and then try to trace that individual, whether or not it belongs to a certain organization. I believe the Russians were too premature to have jumped into a conclusion without actually carrying the necessary forensic and underlying investigation to actually uncover who the woman who carried out that operation is working for. I don't personally see any reason why, of what benefit will the death of that lady be to the Ukrainian people, other than propaganda or some kind of false flag to try to undermine the Ukrainian people. It has absolutely no direct benefit to what they're doing. So I would personally think that the Russians would have taken more time to actually have a more definitive connection between the person they are accusing of having carried out the operation, have a direct link and tied to the Ukrainian government before they came out.
Well, you don't think that Alexander himself might have been the target of this attack? He's been described as a very close personal ally to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, described in some instances as his brain. Has been a supporter of this invasion of Ukraine, which Russia describes as a military operation. And then his daughter also is an activist, very well known in Russia. You don't think that he may have been the one who was targeted? Because at the very last minute, you know, he switched cars with her, and that's how she's the one who died instead of him.
It's possible he could have been the one that was targeted, but the question is who was targeting him. This could also be an insider job. Who knows? There may be. It's not everybody in Russia that supports what's going on in Iraq. In Ukraine. It's not everyone in Russia that is actually happy with the way the operations are going. There are some aggrieved people who may have lost loved ones, even within the Russian intelligence services. That some of them could also be aggrieved. So I'm not saying that they may not have been targeting the father, but what I'm saying is that it's too premature and too early to definitively come up with a conclusion on who actually was responsible for that operation. It could be an insider job. So that is why I am saying that the Russians should have taken more time to do more investigation so as to be able to uncover who actually gave the order for that operation to be carried out, because this is very necessary. Because if that is not done, we're yet to see the end of this kind of operation. If this is an insider job, it will be only a matter of time before you see this kind of activities again.
That's a very interesting perspective and line of thinking. I would like to explore that further, especially, you know, as you know that the Russian President Vladimir Putin is a very calculative person, and he puts, you know, very trusted individuals around himself. Let's turn now to the celebrations tomorrow for Ukraine's independence. Those celebrations have been banned. Of course, they're expecting a barrage of rocket strikes, you know, from Russia on that day. President Zelensky wants Russia to be called a terrorist nation, wanted to be called a terrorist state. What do you think about that?
Well, I don't see the possibility of that happening. Before this war, Russia had been a very responsible member of the international community, and probably still is. Has some very strong allies. To designate them as a terrorist country is going to be a very difficult one, unless this is done on a country-by-country basis. And right now, I don't even think that the United States has the appetite to even go in that direction. So, you know, let's see. But it will be difficult for Russia to be designated as a terrorist country.
But do you think that the invasion is an act of terrorism? I mean, Russia calls it a military operation in Ukraine, but to Ukraine, this is an act of terrorism. Do you also share that view?
Yeah, to the Ukrainians, it may seem as an act of terrorism because of the level of devastation that the Russians had caused to their country. But that's an act of war. You have two conventional forces that are fighting each other, so it'd be very difficult to say that this is an act of terror. We've seen where terrorism had taken places in other parts of the world. This particular one doesn't meet that criteria. You know, we could say there are two countries that are engaged in act of conflict, but to say that it's act of terrorism, that would be a long shot. So I'm not sure how the Ukrainians want to achieve that, but I doubt that is what's actually going to happen, because nobody has that appetite for that for now.
So how would you describe, you know, Russia's control of the nuclear plant in Zaporizhia, you know, where there are fears that there could be a nuclear catastrophe on the horizon because of the shellings that have been going on in and around the city and around the nuclear plants, and everyone is just waiting with bated breath, you know, imploring on Russia to withdraw its forces from the area, especially so that the IAEA investigators can come and check the reactors and possibly save the rest of Europe from a nuclear catastrophe.
Well, when you are in an act of conflict with an opposing force, you have to try to do whatever you can to gain some level of advantage. And unfortunately, with this particular nuclear plant and the Russians taking control of it and possibly firing at the Ukrainians from within the facility, it seems to me that this may not be the best and right approach for the Russians. The Russians are trying to get, some kind of public support. But with this action now, should we eventually have the kind of nuclear disaster or contamination that the world fears, it will not go down well for Russia. Even that Russia, depending on the direction of the winds, even Russians may not be spared should there be some kind of nuclear contamination as a result of military operation in that nuclear plant. I think that the best course of action, to me, is to do what the United Nations is calling for, to demilitarize that nuclear facility. The Russians wanted to use it to get some level of military advantage. But if for any reason there is an accident or something happens that leads to nuclear contamination of some part of Europe and possibly Russia, it would not have worked in their own best interest.
The rest of us are at the mercy, of what happens in Zaporizhia, not just Europe. Thank you so much for speaking with us. Captain Bishop Johnson, retired U.S. Army captain, national defense and military strategist. Appreciate your analysis on the program this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Flowers are being laid and candles lit on Monday in a makeshift memorial for Daria Dugina, a daughter of the Russian ultra-nationalist. Dugina, as we have been mentioning, was killed on Saturday. Ukraine is denied involvement in this attack. Dugina was a media commentator who appeared regularly on state TV. She was also a strong supporter of Russia's actions in Ukraine, which Moscow calls a special military operation. We're off on a break now. Coming up, well, Indonesia and China holding talks on the sidelines of a conference in Indonesia. Stay with us. Welcome back to the second part of the Russian invasion of Ukraine program, holding here on Channels Television. We're following updates from the invasion in and around Ukraine and, of course, in Europe, as well as reactions from around the world. Now, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, beg your pardon, is concerned that he's being taken advantage of by someone close to him. Turkish President Recep Erdogan was citing this during their conversation in a meeting in Lviv on Thursday. Now, asked by a farmer about the Ukrainian leader's situation on Monday during a visit to local vineyards, Mr. Erdogan said that Zelensky was very worried there are people around him who deceive him a lot, he said. The Turkish president, has not mentioned this confession in earlier public statements about the negotiations in western Ukraine. He was there last week with the UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. He also did not elaborate further on who Mr. Zelensky believed was deceiving him. Both men met with the UN Secretary General and signed an agreement on restoring Ukrainian infrastructure, which was destroyed during the conflict. The Ukrainian president has been firing high-ranking members of his administration at a fast clip since Russia's military operation began in February. Special Forces Commander Grigory Galyan was removed last month. A first Deputy Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Ruslan Demchenko, was also let go last month, though for apparent health reasons, while Prosecutor General Irina Venediktova and Intelligence Bureau Chief Ivan Bakanyov were suspended and placed under investigation on suspicion of working with Russia. Not content to merely behead the Ukrainian Security Service, President Zelensky announced a personnel audit in the agency and fired several regional heads as well. He'd apparently been planning to audit the SBU for some time, claiming that on February 24, the day Russia launched its offensive in the Donbass, some representatives of a law enforcement agency were somewhere else instead of protecting their people. A new school year is a day of celebration in Ukraine where children dress up and give bouquets of flowers to their teachers. But Russia's invasion has cast a shadow on the happy day. Now, educational facilities across the country are facing racing to build bunkers and bomb shelters for returning students. Our schools prepare to open their doors in September. Many educators are grappling with the fact that they don't have the ability to provide safety to pupils or peace of mind to parents should their schools come under attack. One of them told international media schools are not designed to be used as defensive facilities. In Irpin, a leafy suburb of the capital Kyiv, fighting has wrecked parts of school number 17, one of the largest in the city that teaches more than 2,400 children aged 6 to 17. Shrapnel has damaged the school's roof and broken all its windows. The gaping holes and bright-colored walls and floors of the school have since been fixed with concrete and plaster. With the help of the United Nations Children's Agency, the school is rebuilding its bomb shelter. They're making it so that it is safe and comfortable. A ninth grader who was visiting the school last Wednesday says she missed her friends and teachers and really wants to go to school. She dreams of hugging her friends and chatting with them. Another said that all he wants is for Ukraine to win and for the Russian president to die, his words. 6 months since the outbreak of war, children like these two we just mentioned are preparing for a new academic year at an enormously challenging moment for the country. Ukraine's armed forces are battling a grinding Russian offensive in the east, and the country's economy is in tatters. The war's taken an extra toll on children's lives and prospects. At least 361 children have died since the war began. 1,072 have been injured. A June survey by the Ukrainian government estimates 5.7 million school children between age 3 and 18 living in Ukraine have been affected by the war. The Kremlin's justification for invading Ukraine is a lie. So says a Russian paratrooper who previously publicly condemned his country's war in Ukraine. 2 weeks ago, Pavel Filatiev spoke out against the conflict in a 141-page long testimony posted to his social media page. Then he fled Russia. He is the first serving member of the Russian military to publicly criticize the invasion of Ukraine and leave the country. Now he tells international media his fellow troops are tired, or is tired, they're hungry, they're disillusioned, and the Kremlin's war effort is destroying peaceful lives. In his words, we understood that we were dragged into a serious conflict where we're simply destroying towns and not actually liberating anyone. Many understood that we did not see the reason that our government is trying to explain to us that all of it is a lie. We're just destroying peaceful lives. This fact immensely influenced our morale, that feeling that we're not doing anything good. He's just 33 years old, and he says corruption and repression are rife in his home country, and his units, which was based in Crimea, and he was sent to Ukraine, entering Kherson early in the conflict. He said the unit was ill-equipped and given little explanation for Russia's invasion. According to Filatiev, the soldiers and the commanders did not know what they were expected to do in Ukraine, adding that they soon became disillusioned with the government's reasoning for its invasion after arriving in Kherson and facing resistance from locals who did not want to be liberated. Joining me now is Professor Denis Solti. He's a professor at the Department of Public Administration and International Development at Kimep University, Almaty in Kazakhstan. Thank you, Professor Solti, for joining me. Soltis, beg your pardon, for joining me on the program this morning. Oh, I think your microphone is muted. I really can't hear you. and we're having problems hearing Professor Soltis. We'll try to correct that and come back to him. His thoughts very important to us. In the meantime, Canada is exploring ways to see if there is a business case to export liquefied natural gas directly to Europe from its east coast. That's according to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He was speaking alongside German Chancellor Olaf Scholz in Montreal. Trudeau said we will do what we can to contribute to the global supply of energy by increasing capacities in the short term. Canada will also explore ways to see if it makes sense to export LNG and if there's a business case for it to export LNG directly to Europe. Economic conversations are ongoing between businesses in Canada and Germany. Both leaders said Russia's invasion of Ukraine is bringing Canada and Germany closer together, with Canada seeking to boost energy and critical mineral exports to Germany as both countries wean themselves off fossil fuels. The two countries are expected to announce today agreements for Canada to accelerate hydrogen and critical minerals exports to Germany.
We are in a situation in the short term where we will do what we can to contribute to the global supply of energy by increasing our capacities in the short term and explore ways to see if it makes sense to export LNG, and if there's a business case for it, to export LNG directly to Europe. And that's something that economic conversations are going on between businesses in Canada and in Germany. But in the medium term and long term, Canada can and will position itself to be a key supplier of energy to the world in a net zero economy. From the government standpoint, easing the processes because of the difficulty that Germany is facing to make sure that we can move through regulatory hurdles more quickly is something we're willing to do. But there needs to be a business case. It needs to make sense for Germany to be receiving LNG directly from the East Coast. Those are discussions that are ongoing right now between our ministers, between various companies, to see if indeed it makes sense.
What Russia is doing is splitting population, splitting allies, splitting all those who are supporting the Ukraine. And this should never succeed. And this is the reason why we are so thankful for the decision of the Canadian government. But as you see from what I say to you, we are working hard to become independent of this gas supply, and we are doing a lot of investments to make it happen, and we are doing it as fast as ever possible. Never such an infrastructure has been built in Germany in that a short time.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you very much.
We have Professor Denis Soltis joining us now. Thankfully, we can hear you. Professor, thank you for joining me this morning. Well, we heard you before, and we can't seem to hear you again. Unfortunately, the connection with Professor Soltis' audio seems to be a bit challenging at the moment. We'll return to him in just a bit. Chinese imports of Russian energy have jumped 75% since the start of the conflict in Ukraine and the ensuing sanctions of the war between Moscow and the West. That's according to Bloomberg, reporting on Monday, citing China's latest customs figures. According to the data covering the period from March to July, Beijing's purchases on Russian oil, on Russian crude oil products, gas and coal rose to $35 billion from about $20 billion a year prior. Increase comes as China takes advantage of Russia's discounts on energy imports, introduced to draw in new buyers after many Western states started to shun Russian commodities due to Ukraine-related sanctions. China imported a record amount of Russian coal in July, 7.4 million tons, 14% more than the same time last year. This made Russia China's top supplier of the fuel last month. relegating Indonesia to second place. Crude imports from Russia to China in July dropped slightly from June, but was still 8% higher than in the same month last year at 7.15 million tons. Shipments of liquefied natural gas showed a 20% increase year-on-year. The figure does not include LNG imports via pipelines, which are the main transport route for the fuel from Russia to China, which means the actual import volume may be much larger. Overall, China spent $7.2 billion on Russian fuel imports in July, up from $4.7 billion in the same month last year. Our business correspondent, Eni John Mekwa, joins me now. Eni, lovely to have you again.
To have you.
So, well, I guess we could say at the moment that China is Russia's most important trade partner at the moment.
Yes. Yes, well, there are a couple of them, but as you noted, China is top on the list because you also have India also there, making use of the opportunity that Russia has cheap oil and, you know, other resources. And I also mentioned India because India is, they're launching a CBDC, that's the currency, you know, like the cryptocurrency, you know. So, and it's all to make it easier for them to interact and transact. So we see them having payment arrangements where they don't have to use the dollar. You know,
I was going to ask that if that was to bypass having to spend.
Exactly, you know. Yes.
Okay.
So they have the CBDC, they have the rupee and ruble payment system. They also have it with China, which is why you see, they're discussing it and having arrangement towards it. But India is going to launch its CBDC very soon to make it easier. And we know that Russia has been working on its own crypto also, you know, to also bypass all of this. And yesterday with Ladi, we talked about SWIFT, an alternative to SWIFT, with which Russia is working on. So all of this is to make it easy for these countries to deal with Russia without going through the dollar or without going through the sanctions and all of that have been put in place. So I think we're going to see even more, and Turkey too.
Yeah, we'll get to Turkey in a minute.
Yes.
Because you're moving really fast this morning.
Yeah. Because they're all related, you know, because they're all related. They're all trade partners to Russia, and we don't hear sanctions coming on these countries.
I was going to say that, you know, these countries have been silent, you know, on this war. Instead, they've implored on the Russian president. In fact, India has said nothing about it, just implored on both sides.
Turkey, what about Turkey? They've done a lot of intimidation.
I'm getting to Turkey. I'm getting to Turkey. So India has instead implored on both sides, you know, to listen to each other, you know, stop the war and all of that, you know, the normal rhetoric that goes on for peace makers and peace negotiators during this crisis. But Turkey has been the one in the forefront, speaking to the Russian President Vladimir Putin, visiting him in Russia, also discussing the possibility of peace talks with Ukraine. They're the ones who are pushing it, even providing the venue, the location for these peace talks to hold. But they also doubled their imports of Russian oil this year. So they're the ones who are cashing out on this war, aren't they?
Yeah, yes, it looks like it. But, you know, one of the things that is on my mind is, where is the Western world? We hear the U.S. Talk about threats, even secondary sanctions, you know, to countries who deal with Russia and all of that. So what are they saying about, because the numbers are out there. When you're talking about oil, you're talking about gas, you know, and mostly, you know, when it comes to India, China, we do know that basically it's not more of the government buying it, it's the private sector. They buy now. Amarachi, there's something very intricate about this thing here. So the private sector, like corporates who deal in oil, they buy this Russian oil, they refine it in their country, and they sell it to the unfriendly countries. So that is it. Because if we talk about India and China, their purchase of Russian oil has been high for how many months now since the war started? Where are they using it? They're not just using it for their population. They're kind of saturated. So when I did a little bit of digging into it, especially for India, found that most of the people who buy it, not the government, and not selling it to the people in India or China, but exporting it. So where are they exporting? Exactly.
Where's it going?
So there are stories that even some of these unfriendly countries are actually using Russian oil indirectly.
And they don't know.
Well, I don't know if they don't know. I don't know if they don't know, Avarachi.
Okay, but let's talk about Africa now and the pursuit of making energy poverty history in Africa by 2030. I know governments always talk about this. They keep pushing, you know, the deadline. The African Energy Chamber met with Pavel Sorokin, the first Deputy Minister of Energy for Russia, to discuss the role of Russia-Africa energy collaboration and so on. What does this all mean, you know, for the continent?
So it means that, you know, there's OPEC Plus. Russia is in OPEC Plus, and you have a lot of African countries, Angola, Nigeria.
Who are not pulling their weight there anyway.
Well, unfortunately so at this time, you know, but it means that Africa is still collaborating with Russia. There's even the BRICS. I don't know if you know about the BRICS, you know, where you have countries.
There are talks about Nigeria joining the BRICS.
About Nigeria joining it. So my fear in this is, if Nigeria joins it, you have countries like South Africa. They've been silent about the war also.
Well, not exactly, though.
Well, not exactly, but
no,
we see that
South Africa has been vocal, though. They have been. They want peace, of course. They want both sides to talk.
Of course, everybody wants peace. What does Nigeria want? We also want peace. But, but what about the sanctions? Are we following it? And now we're talking of BRICS and seeing more African countries. We're seeing Egypt. We're seeing Angola. Let's not talk about the Saudi Arabia and all of those oil-producing countries. You know, we're seeing Nigeria saying that they're interested in joining BRICS, which is coordinated by Russia. What does this say about our relationship? What does this say about our view, you know, about the war? If the Western country and countries like Germany are suffering a lot, they're talking of recession, their energy, I mean, Russia has said they're going to cut supply gas for 3 days now from the 31st to the 2nd, and that alone has done another level of harm to their energy prices, you know. So, and we are talking about BRICS. They just met in July, you know, and these countries are expressing their interest to be part of BRICS. Then what does this say about our stance about the war? Maybe we're not strong enough to stand on our own. That is why. But, you know, we also have to look at what about our relationship with the Western world, with the U.S. and all those other European countries.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned the U.S. Because I think it was last month, a few weeks ago, that Janet Yellen made the announcement that countries that deal with Russia will be facing sanctions from the United States. So have we started facing those sanctions? Because now it seems like we're dealing more with Russia, and it appears, you know, the rest of the world is dealing more with Russia directly or indirectly.
Or indirectly. So, and that's why I talked about the BRICS, because BRICS is direct, building a direct relationship with Russia, and now we want to collaborate, and we're having summits and all of that, and we have their Deputy Minister of Energy meeting with African countries, discussing the security of energy and all of that. I mean, you know, at the bottom of this also, if we had more developed resources, perhaps we would not. Because one of the strengths of China, I think, that China is dealing with Russia openly, and then they don't have sanctions, or we don't hear threats of sanctions coming on them. I think they can stand on their own. But, you know, we have a lot of imports coming from the United States and all those. Then if anything happens, what happens to us? When we talk about our debts, we're paying it in dollars. If we were to have a 10th of the kind of sanctions that Russia is facing, I don't know if Nigeria...
Don't run us down so much, Ini. Have some hope for Nigeria at least.
Yeah, I believe.
We're working on it.
Yeah, we're working on it, and thank God that we have elections coming on, so it's an opportunity to also show the work, you know, when we go out and vote and choose the people we believe believe can get us out.
Ine, stick to the business of it all. Thanks for joining us this morning. Look forward to your show later on. Ine John Mekwa, our business correspondent, joined her at 10 o'clock for Business Morning. Beg your pardon. Yeah, that's right. It's 10 o'clock for Business Morning. I'm sorry. Haven't had coffee this morning. I'm not the same. We're going off on a short break now. When we come back, a wartime Ukraine presses on with new football season. You want to stick around for that story. Stay with us. Welcome back to the last lap of the show this morning. Frontline towns in Ukraine's east, a constant target of Russian shelling, are facing a new problem: water shortage. In Donetsk region's Toretsk, residents living in the rubble of blasted out apartments are having to rely on emergency rescue workers for their water supply. Water is pumped from the river, filtered and distributed to residents by emergency workers. One of the residents there said the situation is tense, it's very hard. The shelling comes every day. Her own house has electricity but no gas and no water. Local authorities say rockets hit Toretsk, a nearby Konstantinivka, where a school was damaged. At least 2 civilians were killed in eastern Donetsk province, according to Ukrainian authorities. Russia denies it's targeting civilians in this war, but international media has still not been able to independently verify the battlefield reports of either side. Sports now. A Ukrainian tennis player, Marta Kostyuk, has been slammed, or has slammed, Belarusian Victoria Azarenka for participating in the pre-US Open fundraiser event, stating she will not take part because athletes from Russia and Belarus appearing at the event. The exhibition event is set to be held on Ukraine's Independence Day. It's just tomorrow at the Louis Armstrong Stadium in New York City to raise awareness and humanitarian aid for the war-torn country. Kostyuk was irritated by Azarenka's involvement, claiming that the Belarusian had given her no help, even though she is a member of the Women's Tennis Association Players Council. Basketball, great Dennis Rodman is to travel to Russia to assist the release efforts for imprisoned 2-time Olympic champion Brittany Griner, who was sentenced to 9 years in prison on drug smuggling charges. A known friend of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, an unofficial United States peace ambassador to the country, Rodman will be aiming to continue his work helping imprisoned Americans to be returned to their home country. Rodman is regarded as one of the most controversial basketball players of all time during his playing days in the NBA, notably becoming a 5-time champion, including in 3 consecutive years with greats such as Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen at the Chicago Bulls. His visits to North Korea coincided with the releases of Kenneth Bay and Otto Warmbier, but Rodman and American authorities deny he played a part in the release of the latter, who died days afterwards while still in coma. And that'll be all this morning. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani. See you later. I
also have no doubt.
To backtrack on this.